because there is no hierarchy of trauma. Trauma has absolutely nothing to do with what happened to you. It's about what happened in you.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in this week. What we're bringing you today is a little bit different, and it's powerful. I've met Matt Gangloff a handful of times, and I've known that he has an intense personal story. Though before this conversation, we had never spoken about it directly. His story is the driving force behind his business, Enlyten Lab. And we don't talk much about Enlyten Lab in this episode. It's a great place, and I encourage you to check it out. Instead, Matt shares his personal experiences in the military and his post-deployment battles with anxiety, depression, and addiction. I've been thinking about this a lot since recording. Matt offers some critical wisdom for all of us. You know, many of us live with anxiety and depression every day. It could be ourselves, it could be someone we love, it could be someone we work with or teach. It's an issue touching all of us, and I don't think we're doing a very good job as a society talking about it or helping people. This is the part of the episode where I normally say, I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. Well, I'm not really expecting you to enjoy this one, but I do hope that you listen, and I hope you listen to the end because this stuff is important. So here we go, Matt Gangloff, right now. Okay, so we're here today with Matt Gangloff. Matt, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
How's that coffee treating you?
It's from Drum Coffee, and it's fantastic. And I'll see you guys all tomorrow morning around 8 o'clock.
Yeah, that's your normal spot.
That's my normal spot.
I'd like to say that we just customized the blend just for you, but this is a service to all the guests here today.
I know. I was a Bernice's fanatic for years, and now just because of where I spend most of my time, I'm more on the drum crew.
Very good.
Yeah.
So you are the owner, founder, co-founder of Enlyten Labs?
Yeah, owner, founder, all that stuff.
Yeah. How long have you been doing that now?
Let me see.
Because I remember when you guys were working with the Launchpad to kind of get off and running.
Yeah. I think, it's funny. Launchpad was definitely like my first stop. Back when I was in school here. I think I hold the title as the first intern to ever work at Launchpad.
Really?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. Close.
There's quite a lineage there. So
I know, and they're all great. They're all very good. But I was the first, just to write that down. So yeah, I knew where to go when you had a new business idea that you needed to flesh out and see how to bring it to life. And that would have been. So we'll hit our 3-year anniversary of being in operation February 14th of this year.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah. So that was, so 3 years. And then we probably had, it probably took us like 6 to 8 months of build out.
Yeah.
Just getting everything started before that.
Right. I want to get into all that. But before we do, for listeners that don't know what Enlyten Labs is, let's just give us the sort of quick elevator pitch of what your business is all about.
Yeah. Well, this is new. I don't think I've ever tried this one out.
Your workshop
on the
here.
spot. Yeah. So, our mission is just to provide, safe, natural ways to help you manage stress. We do that a number of different ways. You probably, if you've heard of Enlyten Lab before, you've probably heard of us as like the float tank people.
Sure.
So we definitely got those. That's kind of the core of what we do. But we've expanded a lot, over the last few years, all centered around that idea of managing stress. And so we've added infrared sauna, we've added massage, we've added yoga and meditation, both in like workshop, online, all kinds of stuff. But it's really all centered around that idea, stress and the conditions that get worse when we don't manage our stress appropriately.
Okay. Well, stress is a reality in all of our lives.
Yeah.
But you've had a particular relationship with stress.
You could say that.
Yeah. So if you're okay with it, let's dig into some of that story.
Yeah, for sure.
Grew up out east, Vermont, and then joined the military at a time when a lot of people were joining the military.
Yeah, man, that was a wild time in history. It's weird to think how long ago that was and how different. Yeah, 18 years, man. So I was, in order to tell that story right, you really do need to go all the way back to 9/11, because, I was, how old was I? I was probably a sophomore in high school.
In high school.
At that point. And growing up in Vermont, I mean, you're not far from
No.
New York City. I mean, it's in the neighborhood,
Yep.
essentially, or at least that's how it feels. And, you know, I remember I was walking into, it was like 9th or 10th grade biology or some similar class. And you know, the flow of kids just like reverses, and they're sending everybody to the library, and so they tucked everybody in there, and they wheeled out, you know, one of those big old TVs on the stand, and they were playing the footage, and I remember that moment vividly, and you know, man, everything seemed to change after that. Like, so for people that didn't live through it, it's tough to imagine, but it just felt like after that point, everybody was more tense, scared, on edge, stressed out for sure.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it was like, you know, I was kind of a little bit of a rebellious kid, was definitely one of those ones like, oh, I can't wait to get out of this town. I'm going to go do amazing things elsewhere, and everything will be different, that kind of thing. And when 9/11 happened, the thing that it did to me was, oh man, my view of the world went from this view that was like, you know, out there is like a warm, welcoming place full of opportunity, to a place that was a lot darker and a lot scarier than I had ever imagined, right? And so at that age, the only way that I could really come up to deal with that was that I had to be tougher.
Okay.
You know, that I had to be stronger.
In order to survive in this world, the
Right.
reality that you're seeing at this moment is you got to be tougher.
Absolutely. And you know, you can say whatever you want about the way I made the decision, but the decision that I decided to make was that I was just going to go for it. I was going to go after it and go. I was going to join the Army. My brother had just done it right before that, and you know, he was a post. He joined post 9/11, but when he was in boot camp was when the invasion of Baghdad kicked off.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Or maybe slightly before that, when we knew we were going, but it hadn't actually happened yet. And so I remember that was a really well defined moment at that age too, was like, you know, watching Wolf Blitzer announcing the invasion of Baghdad was, and watching the bombs drop and on CNN, and knowing that my brother was on his way over there. Like, it was a for sure. And it was that was really the moment that solidified it. In my mind was like, you know, well, what makes me better than him? If he's going to go, like, why shouldn't I go?
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about like the motivation to gain toughness, to be prepared for the world. Is there also like I want to go over and fight those guys that did this to us? Or is it more just I want to develop as a person? Like, what's kind of...
You know, I never had that.
Yeah.
A lot of people do.
Yeah.
I think some of that is like a little bit of an ego defense
Totally.
thing. Like the way they psych themselves up to go do something so hard is to get angry about it. I never had that. Like, I never had, you know, I wasn't patriotic. I certainly didn't want to fight. I was a terrified kid.
Yeah.
But again, that's why I went, was because I wanted to get tougher.
Sure.
I didn't want to be vulnerable. I didn't want to feel like I felt that day. And like, I thought, what better way to do this than to go be one of the toughest people on the planet?
Yeah.
You know, and so that's what I did.
Okay. So your brother's over in Iraq, and then you enlist a couple years later, it sounds like. And yeah, you're sent over there yourself.
Yeah. So you bounce around a little bit before you go do anything like that. So I went to basic training, and then airborne school after that. And then I got assigned to a unit with the 82nd out of Fort Bragg, North
And that's
Carolina.
like the elite of the elite, right? Like, I mean, well,
Yeah, when it comes to the regular Army.
yeah,
Or at least
the regular Army.
There's a ton of guys out there right now cringing because they're expecting me to be like, yeah, you know, the 82nd is the tip of the spear,
Sure,
or
yeah.
whatever. I'll try not to do that, but yeah, I mean, within the regular Army, I mean, they're definitely seen as one of the more elite units. But then there's special forces, this and that, and everything, and all the way on up to SEALs and Delta. So,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you're in the
I've heard some of those jokes, but I will not make them. As a non-military guy, I will not like even open my mouth about any of those.
That's probably safe.
Correct.
That's probably safe. And so before before my first deployment, well, my real kind of first deployment was Hurricane Katrina.
Okay.
When that happened.
So that's 2005. Yep.
Yeah. Was that 2005?
Yeah, I think
oh
so.
my God. How long ago? That's
Or
crazy.
4 or 5.
I think probably 5.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
We're giving a lot to the fact-checking department here
Yeah.
at the
You
podcast.
guys will have to Google all this for me. So we did that. I mean, man, I could talk hours about that. I mean, that was just a fascinating,
I'm sure.
a fascinating thing to be a part of. And then, first deployment to Iraq was in 2000. Well, I was there 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that would have been 2007, 2008
Okay.
time period. And that time we were in Tikrit, which wasn't a terrible place to be. Certainly not the best, but not terrible.
Yep. And how long is a typical deployment? Like when you talk about that
Yeah.
unit of time, what does that entail?
Yeah, it's usually a year.
Okay.
If you're Army, some other branches do shorter. But
Yep.
one of the interesting things about that one was right in the middle of the surge. So I was over there, and generally they'll give you mid-tour leave, like partway through. You get a break, you come home for 2 weeks and chill out, and then
Okay.
go back. And I wanted to wait as long as I could, so I would go on mid-tour as late as possible and come back and maybe only have a couple months left, and then come home.
Sure.
And so I took mid-tour, and I was at home when this would have been when Bush announced that we were going to do this surge program, and everybody that was there now was going to be extended,
Right.
So that one was 15 months, and so I was home at month like 9, thinking I had 2 or 3 months left, and really I had a whole another half of a year over there. So that was another, man. And just in this conversation, I've realized I've seen a lot of really amazing, personally impactful things on TV. You
Yeah.
ever think about that?
Yeah.
That's pretty
That's
crazy.
been your view to the world.
Yeah.
I mean,
kinda
as we're
has
talking
been.
about it, I'm thinking about a lot of my interaction with this stuff. And yeah, 9/11 was sort of a TV experience in many
Yeah.
ways. And then I know people that are directly involved, and
Yep.
soldiers that fought, some didn't come back, and all of that. But a lot of that's mediated through television.
Yeah. Yep.
But you had experiences that were not mediated through television. You were in it.
No. Yeah, we were in it. I mean, primarily our job over there, I was what they call a combat engineer.
Right.
And so, in years past, historically, that had a very different connotation. The job was very different than it is now, being the way that the war was kind of fought in Iraq. The mission set that we had was route clearance.
Yep.
Almost 100% of the time. And what that is driving up and down the road 5 miles an hour or slower and looking in every pile of trash, pothole, brick, whatever, and looking for bombs. And 99% of the time there was nothing. But that you're not worried about the 99%.
Yeah.
You're worried about the one.
Right.
And I really think that that is probably, I mean, you could argue this a million different ways, but that's one of the most stressful things in the world.
Sure.
Because you never get to go to that place where you're not in danger. You're in danger 100% of the time. And to survive, like your mind has to think worst case scenario all the time. And so you get locked into it over time.
Yeah, it gets probably reinforced by accidents in the field.
Yep.
Where, bomb goes off and you're like, oh, that crew let their guard down, or they didn't catch that one, or
Yep.
and that reinforces that.
Yeah.
Got to be on all the time.
On all the time.
So let's kind of fast forward a little bit.
Sure.
But like this experience, then you have to go, like you went back for a second major deployment, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about how, the first time around, it felt like there was some sort of higher purpose to this. The
Yeah.
second time around, that started to erode a little bit. Is
Yeah,
that?
absolutely.
Okay.
Again, oh my God, I'm about to tell another on TV story. So I'm sitting in the chow hall in
Sitting in the chow. Well, sorry.
Chow hall?
Chow hall.
Oh, sorry,
Hall.
like
Chow
the-
hall. I'm getting the
cafeteria?
the jargon.
Yeah, the cafeteria, if you will. And so they always have TV screens and they're always playing the news. And so it was Obama at this point. And he said, in a press conference, I'll never forget this. Well, you may remember, they're like, well, we're taking all of our troops out of the cities and we're going to hand that over to the Iraqis and we're going to, we'll be out.
Okay.
in the next couple months or years or whatever. And I was listening to him say that, sitting in a chow hall in the middle of Baghdad, the biggest city in Iraq,
Right.
and still going out on missions every single day, and people are
Yep.
dying, and and just hearing that, and just being like, oh my God, they're not even telling people we're here anymore. Like they're I don't know how they're going to explain, how
Gosh.
people are dying, but that really was the point where it just kind of broke me. And that deployment was a lot worse too, because the fighting became a lot more sporadic, but a lot more lethal.
Okay.
So you've probably heard this stuff too. Like there was a big hubbub at that time that like Iran was importing these new kind of IEDs that could just tear through anything, and that's true. They're called, if you're interested, explosively formed penetrators, or EFPs, and so those could go through, I think they said, like 14 inches of reinforced armored steel. So there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing you can do. And so now you're still driving around slow, looking for these things that, I don't care what kind of truck you're in, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became a lot more stressful too, because things happen less frequently, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but it's almost better if things happen all the time than
I can understand that. Yeah. Because then that stress piece,
Yep.
kind of what we're thinking of. And then you layer on this, like, some disillusionment, like, okay, our country's kind of forgotten about it.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be sent here to serve some higher calling. But
but it was clear, like, we weren't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
Life was, for the average person, was worse than when we started.
Right.
The corruption was rampant, and the fighting was still going on, and it's so slippery. Like, you just can't get there was no winning. There's no winning at all. So it's just a matter of if you're going to survive to see the end.
And so you survived to see the end of it for you, at least in terms of getting out of the military.
Sure.
You just sort of ran out the clock, survived that, which, unfortunately is an accomplishment of a sort.
Sure. Yeah. And because, I was kind of held over, so I signed up for 4 years, and then they have this policy that we were talking about beforehand called stop loss, where if they need you, they can keep you. They don't care what your contract says.
Sure.
And so the cutoff day where, if you were still here on this day, you were going back for another deployment.
Okay.
And this was my second one, was the day I was supposed to get out.
Oh, geez.
So it was like the worst case scenario, So I got extended for 18 months past my contract to go back on that deployment. And so by the time I got out, I was already a year and a half overdue. I was supposed to be gone, right? And so I just kind of packed up everything and took off. And, I can look back on it now and be like, oh my God, the kind of shape that I was in at that point. I mean, going from, just imagine, one day you're driving up and down streets in Baghdad looking for bombs.
Yep.
The next day you're driving cross country and you're supposed to be a completely different person.
Yeah.
I was not. I was stuck in that state for years, probably years. Just at that level of 10.
That level of stimulation, that level of stress, that level of constantly feeling threat.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. And even, that lasted with me all through college, really.
Yeah. Okay, so University of Montana came shortly after that return home.
Yep.
And you're at this state of high anxiety. At some point, like, this is has to start getting dysfunctional for you.
Oh, absolutely.
You started making bad choices with how you manage that stress, right?
For sure. And that's a big problem with going from, the military to college is, the military kind of famous for its drinking culture.
Yep.
College, same way.
Sure.
And for me, the way that it kind of manifested itself was, I was absolutely stressed to the maximum. I think by that point you could definitely make the case that it was becoming clinical.
Yep.
Like certainly PTSD, probably anxiety, depression, definitely some chronic pain stuff. And then the way that I kind of dealt with that was the way that stress, anxiety really manifests itself. The thing that you notice first is how busy your mind is all the time. And it's usually like a really negative kind of bend to it.
Yeah. Thinking all the time, dwelling all the time, mostly negative.
Yeah. And mostly about how, you could or should be different, so the things that bother you don't bother you anymore, right?
Which is the downward spiral.
Which is
Yeah.
absolutely a downward spiral. And the only thing that I really found that could shut off that just racing mind was alcohol, and which, this is, man, this I think is a much bigger problem than anybody is willing to give it credit for. But the two things were perfect. The me coming off, the military stuff and being at that high stress level, and then moving right into an environment where it's perfectly acceptable, almost expected to drink every day or to be out on the town
kind
all
of like
weekend.
in some college cultures, it's kind of like a thing of distinction.
Oh yeah, it's a badge of honor.
He can hold his alcohol.
Yeah.
He can drink such and so under the table, and
Right.
and yeah, I can see how that would be a really toxic swap for you.
Absolutely. And the thing that nobody will tell you about alcohol is it's a depressant on its own. So
Right.
if you're already feeling that way, and you're layering on, alcohol on top of that, like, good luck. It's not gonna be pretty. And it got very unpretty for me really, really
So
fast.
while you're an undergrad, or had you graduated? Like, how are you coping as a student at this point?
I always did pretty well in school. I don't know, we could look it up. But I was always Dean's List, or, school really came easy to me.
Yeah.
But
which can be part of the problem, right? You're
It is.
functioning at a high level in your sort of day job, so to
Yeah.
speak, but you're also falling apart outside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I could get by with kind of doing the minimum, and was never too overly challenged by it, and could just kind of get by. But then I was left figuring out how to fill the other, because you're not all that busy as a college student, especially, I shouldn't say that. There's plenty of people who are working full time and going to class. I didn't have to do that because GI Bill and all that. So I was really lucky in that regard, but also really unlucky because, what do you got, 4 hours of classes a day? If you're taking,
what are you going to do with all
what
the
are you
other
gonna
time?
do with all your other time?
And you're older than most students at this
Yeah.
point. You're socially distant, probably from
absolutely.
the core culture here.
Yep, absolutely. And, my ego did a real good job of hiding that too. It's very, very easy to convince yourself, after you get out of the military, you're in college now, and you're partying a ton, and it's very easy to make the case to yourself like, oh, I'm celebrating my newfound hardly fought freedom.
Yeah, totally.
That's a great argument. But what happened with me was, over time, you just couldn't deny that this was not a party anymore. This was like I was circling the drain really, really fast. Yeah.
Gosh, and so at what point do you realize that this is bad? I got to start trying to figure this out. I got to start making better choices with my life.
Yeah, I think I think the straw that really broke the camel's back was realizing how much money I'd run through, because especially like when I was, I was promoted really rapidly, and so I was making actually relatively good money in the military.
As a soldier,
yeah. I don't know.
And you don't have a ton of expenses. I mean,
zero.
you'd be banking a bunch of cash.
Yeah. And if you're always deployed, it's just going in the bank.
Sure.
And that was kind of my plan, was like, this is so I can really focus on college and not have to work a whole lot. And then getting towards, I think I was probably like a junior when this all happened, and it just dawned on me like, oh my God, by the time I'm done with this, I'm going to be out of money and starting over. Ugh. And that makes you beg the question, okay, like where did you spend all this money? And where did I spend it? I spent it at, downtown.
Yeah.
And,
this is still a very kind of pragmatic calculation. You seem to have this meta-awareness of you're caught in this negative downward spiral, but you're able to kind of, it seems like you can be kind of present enough to realize what's happening around you.
That could be just because I'm looking back on it now.
Perhaps, that's a good point. Yeah.
Because I remember, the way that I experienced it, and, this is something, the next thing I'm going to say is something you want to be careful with. But I just want to warn people about what I'm about to say. So for me, the way that I experienced this when I was at kind of my lowest point was, the racing mind. Mm-hmm. But the things that it was saying were all that I should kill myself. constantly.
Really?
I mean, 24 hours a day.
God.
You know, I have to go deposit this check at the bank, kill yourself. I have to go, you know, anything could,
Wow.
it was just,
It's a constant track in
and
your
it
mind.
loops back on itself. So it says, you know, I'm having this suicidal thought. And then what we do is we go, okay, what's wrong with you? What's so wrong with you that you have these thoughts? And then you're stuck
You're
back
stuck
in that
it.
loop,
Yeah.
you know? And, you know, it did get worse from there, but it kind of came to a breaking point where it was no longer like a private thing that I was dealing with. Like the right people got notified, and it was an ugly process. You know, the story's not that great, but the right people found out about it. And
Okay. So you're developing a support network of a sort.
yeah, just, you know, friends and well, one part of it that I definitely can share, and this is something that probably is important for people to hear, is, you know, when this all blew up, when it all finally came to a head, you know, I called my brother, who was now living out here with me, going to school too, which was, oh my God, that was the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And, you know, he had just gotten out. He had similar experiences, was obviously suffering in his own right, but he was suffering in a very different way that like looked better to me, I guess. And I called him when all this happened, and I told him, you know, how I was feeling, what I was thinking about doing, and I'll never forget what he said. He just kind of like nodded his head, and he you know, teared up a little bit, and he just looked at me. He said, I don't have any idea what to do either. And for me, that was like, oh my God, because that just broke down all these narratives that I had about like, oh, everybody else has this figured out. It's only me that doesn't know what to do.
You're not alone.
Not alone at all. And that really woke me up to the fact, like, yo, you are here. You have to do this alone. Like, it's great. People know you've got support, you know, friends, family, all that stuff. But you have to do this. Like, nobody's coming to save you. And I remember it was the next morning after that conversation that I woke up. And this is so funny that this was the first thing that I did. It says a little bit about me. But, you know, I had I started losing my hair as soon as I got out, which was like the worst thing in the world to me.
Go to college with balding.
Yeah. Well, that, and it was like a very standard way to say, like, screw the army. When guys get out, it's like, I'm going to grow a beard. I'm going to grow my hair as long
You're finally allowed to grow your hair out. Yeah.
And so
that is
it's terrible,
irony.
Terrible luck on my part. And I remember, you know, the first positive step that I took was I was getting ready to go to the gym here at the university, and I looked in the mirror, and I did one of those little comb over moves that you do when you're balding, and
I'm
I just
familiar with that move.
Yeah. Almost all of us at this age, like, you know, even if you're not totally bald, you don't have as much as you'd like, but and I just caught my reflection in the mirror. I kind of just like looked myself in the eye. I was like, what are you doing this for? Like, why does this matter to you? And I'll never forget, I just grabbed my clippers and I just shaved a patch right down the middle of my head. I've been shaving my head ever since, and I've never thought about it again.
Interesting.
But that was the first thing that kind of put me on this positive track.
A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hi, this is Sheila Stearns, Commissioner Emerita of the Montana University System and former president of the University of Montana. You are listening to one of my favorite podcasts, A New Angle.
And then, funny enough, this is probably where you first we first probably crossed paths. Was like, I realized that the stress thing was a huge problem. Like, I was really in a bad spot. The stress, but also I think it was more anxiety at that point. And one of the way that it really manifested in me was I couldn't talk to anybody. Like, having this conversation that I'm having here with you and looking you in the eyes, a complete impossibility. However many 10 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd break out in hives.
Sure.
You know, I'd sweat. My eyes would water.
You probably couldn't even access those things.
It just felt like anytime somebody looked at me, they could see all the shit that I'd done.
Geez. Yeah.
You know, they could see right through you. And so I just kind of felt myself like crushing in on myself, like becoming smaller and more withdrawn. And so, I had Cameron's class.
Uh-huh.
And, summer was coming up, and I was like, man, I know I get really down when I don't have stuff to do. Like, maybe I can do some kind of independent study. And so I did one with Cameron. And so I spent the whole summer, like, tinkering around with this cool stuff and trying to, like, build a prototype for something.
Mm-hmm.
And finally I got something together that was, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it was terrible. But that doesn't matter. So I bring it to Cameron.
Sure, you're making something.
Yeah. And he just kind of, as he's always very warm and everything, but just kind of nodded, and he goes, okay, now build a business out of it. And I was like, oh man, that's a completely different thing. I don't even know. I'm 3 years into a business degree, and
where do I start?
I don't even know where to start. So that's when I went to Launchpad.
Right.
I became an intern there. I, took Paul for all he was worth in terms of advice and mentorship. And then, so this would have been now my senior year. We entered I guess I was a solo at that point. I entered the business plan competition in the winter, and we won that. And that was like.
And this is with this little gadget idea? This is not with the Enlyten idea, right?
No, this was the little gadget idea. We're just building like wireless chemical detectors. The application was like, we wanted to use them for like pollution, fracking, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so we do the first business plan competition, and now I'm going from a guy who can't look you in the eyes or have a conversation with you without having a, anxiety attack to somebody who's standing in front of, 200 people pitching an idea that, and then, so that was like, that really got me fired up. And because I was seeing this progress, because
and are you alone in this progress, or are you getting some therapy, some counseling? Like what's your support
at this
team?
point,
you just
I was
driving
white
through on your
knuckling
own?
it, man.
Okay.
I was just white knuckling the whole thing.
Off the booze?
I definitely took a major step back, but I wasn't off of it at all.
Okay.
But that's interesting that you bring that up, because that was one of the first things that I noticed that I realized that had the biggest effect on my stress and anxiety was like, if I was doing like if I had to go pitch somewhere, go have a conversation, I just like 2 or 3 days before, just stop, don't drink, because
get some clarity of mind, feel better sleep, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, everybody that gives up alcohol or even goes on a break from it, that's the first thing they say, is that's the worst part about having a drinking habit is the anxiety that you feel the very next morning. And so that was how I started. And then, so I kept getting a little bit better and a little bit better. And really the thing is I needed a challenge that was big enough for me to sort the lifestyle issues out that I had to sort out. You know what I mean?
It's just remarkable you're kind of self-guiding through this process.
I mean, it probably sounds pretty now, but at the time it was a lot of trial and error.
Yeah,
and ugliness.
of course.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is like, for all the guys, there's probably other guys that didn't make it as far as you have. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah, it's absolutely true.
You fought really hard, have made good choices, but didn't have a lot of help along the way.
Sure.
It sounds like.
Yeah. I wasn't doing the therapy thing. I wasn't sober or anything like that. I was just kind of trying to do a little bit better.
It's something you were working toward.
Yeah. I just needed something that was meaningful enough so that everything else became less important. And probably I needed some self-confidence too, and like winning a competition will do that for you, for sure.
Yeah.
And then so we won that one, and then so I still had a semester to wrap up, and so we entered again in the bigger one, the spring one, and we won that too. And man, that was something.
And you get some major seed money to go further this idea.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And that was great. Ultimately, we ended up not pursuing that business. It's just so far beyond what we were actually capable of doing, which, by the way, this is probably a good thing, but absolutely nobody will tell you when you're starting a business if you're incapable of pulling off the thing that you want to do. Like, it's just an interesting aside, but that was definitely the case with us. And so I came a really long way through that process, and it's just such an interesting thing to me that at least the first major thing that really helped me was like this interest in entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that you could replace that interest with anything, like guitar, ballet, whatever turns you on.
Sure.
Like that's the thing that you probably need to find.
Find that and go
Yeah.
for it. That's a positive life force in a way.
Yep.
So at what point, does the Enlyten thing get on your radar screen?
Oh
or,
man, this is beautiful. I mean, you couldn't write a better script if you wanted to. So, like I do the college thing, do the, startup business thing that ultimately ends up panning out. It's very difficult. Like when you need to start making a paycheck in a startup business right out of college, very difficult to do that. It's huge uphill battle. And so ultimately we decided not to pursue that. And then I go, get the big time consulting job that everybody tells you to get when you get out of college.
Yep.
And was relatively successful in that, but I was right back into just this stress mode, like almost worse than I was before.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of things that drive that. The first being, especially for me, it was like, okay, you just joined another team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Last team I was on, if your chances of survival were better if you put absolutely everything into it. There was no such thing as work-life balance. There was no such thing, it just didn't exist. So I kind of started falling into the same old habits of just being stressed out and not taking care of myself. And
Is it this consulting gig traveling a lot too?
Not a lot of travel.
Here in Missoula? Like where were you working?
Mostly in Missoula.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And so I started to feel the effects of stress, and man, it's so funny. The thing that got me. You ever listen to Joe Rogan podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I figured everybody does. It seems like. So I got really big into the Joe Rogan podcast all the way back when I was doing that first summer internship for Cameron. And so I would be like tinkering on this little thing and watching the Joe Rogan podcast.
Sure.
And I was still a big fan of it all the way up into this point. And so I'm at work one day. I'm just stressed out to the absolute maximum. And I get in my car, I start driving home. And somebody cuts me off in traffic. And before you know it, like I'm out of control.
Yep.
I'm punching the steering wheel. I'm screaming out the window. I'm, like anything that you can think of, I'm doing it. And I get home, and the first thing I do is like I walk into the kitchen and I pour myself like probably too tall of a glass of wine, and I start drinking it. And I go and I sit on the couch and I turn on the Joe Rogan podcast. And it's live, right? So it just comes up wherever it is in the episode. And Duncan Trussell was the guest that day.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever heard of him, but they were talking about people who work shitty jobs and what that's doing to the population.
Yeah.
And word for word, it's still on YouTube. You can Google this. Joe goes, he goes, yeah, that guy driving home from work, like punching the steering wheel, flipping everybody off screen. And that just happened to me. So I'm like, I'm here with you. And he goes, well, yeah, what do you expect? These like meaningless jobs that are not fulfilling, and they're not, they're not challenging people. And challenging wasn't my problem, but you can fill in all the blanks. And Duncan goes, you know what the cure for that is, right? Joe goes, no, what? He goes, meditation. And I was like, oh man, that's incredible. And Joe goes, yeah, but what about float tanks? And
I've heard Rogan talk about float tanks, so that was your entry point.
Yeah, but it gets even funnier than that. This will tell you how powerful stress is I had tried floating like 6 months before.
Oh, you
that.
had?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a little place up in Whitefish that I'm not sure if it's still there, but it used to be there. And so I was driving back and forth to Whitefish to go do this. And I'd done it a couple times, and even after my first time, I was like, oh my God, like this is the thing for me. This is what's doing it. Missoula needs one of these so bad.
Yeah,
and like I'm just the person to do this, And my plan was, I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can. I'm going to save as much money as I can. Yep. And then 6 months, I'm gone, and I'm going to go do this thing. I'm going to build this business. And that day when I turned on that podcast, was like 8 months or something after when I said I would be done in 6 months. And I hadn't thought about it since. Like
So you got fired up about this idea, and then it just got crammed away, and then so this experience with the Rogan thing and that afternoon triggered it again.
Totally. And he goes, the way that, and I burst into tears when he said this. He's like, anyone can do it. He's like, the biggest float tank center in the world just opened in Pasadena. Like, the word's out. Everybody knows. Like, this is a thing that everybody needs. And it just broke me, because I realized, like, oh my God, I'm just as off track as I've ever been, but I'm doing it in a way that, like, that's what everybody tells you to do.
Yep.
Like, go get the job, do the things, save the money,
You're doing everything right, sort of.
Yep. But I'm still suffering like hell.
Yeah.
And what really...
And then an outsider might look at you and think, man, he's got it all together. He's crushing it at work. He's doing great. And have no idea that you're kind of a mess inside.
Yeah. So I didn't really know what to do. I kind of went to bed that night thinking, like, oh man, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. But I wasn't sure until, I walked in, and, all these people that I worked with, that I went to school with, that we graduated together, and now we're all doing this thing, who have really good lives by comparison. They've got good partners, they've got great jobs. Everything is just, on paper, is going perfect for them. And I'll never forget, like, I locked eyes with this one woman that I work with, and she was on a client call or something like that. And the look on her face, I mean, it almost was like it was almost like a flashback to me, because, like, when I looked at her and how the stress and like fear in her face, it reminded me of, like, looking at another soldier after, something terrible just happened. Just that seen a ghost look. And that's when it hit me, man. It's like, oh, it's not that, like, I'm stressed out and nobody else is. It's that I'm stressed out, and because of my previous experiences, like, I'm really aware of it when I'm stressed out, and nobody else feels like they have the right to it. And that is, like, talk about self-attack. That's the word. Like, you feel bad, but you're not allowed to feel that way because you have money and a husband and, whatever. And I was like, okay, that's it. I got this. This is not a problem just for me. It's not just a problem for vets. It's a problem for everybody. And if we don't figure out how to solve this stress problem, like, we're going to die from it. All of us. I mean, the stats are starting to get there.
Oh, yeah. And then you layer on, social media and polarized political environment and
all that.
All these things, just sort of hitting it on the accelerator. So did you quit your job that day?
I quit my job that day.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I do not recommend this. Like, if you have a good job and you have this dream business that you want to start, make a plan. Like, don't just jump because you're under stress or you're,
Sure. But these catalyzing events and moments of courage, sometimes that's what it takes. Even if it might be unwise,
absolutely,
it's the change that's needed to turn your life around.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it any other way.
Sure.
I'm glad that the things that I've done have, because I've made all those decisions. I made joining the Army that way. I made moving to Missoula that way. I starting the lab did that way, and so I'm comfortable with it. For me, I just don't want somebody to take my example and suffer unnecessarily.
I mean, everybody's got to find their own path, but oftentimes ripping the Band-Aid is the way to do things.
Yeah,
at least in my experience. So tell me a little bit about the experience of the tank itself.
Yeah.
And I know, like, we started this conversation with, they think of my business as just that float tank place.
Sure.
And you do a whole lot of other stuff, and I want to circle back to that. But, what was it about the tank experience that sort of clued you in that this is a way forward for dealing with your stress and anxiety?
I realized for the first time in my entire life that I wasn't my thoughts.
That you were not your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Explain what that means.
Yeah. So I can give you an example. I'm in the tank, right? And so the tank, I can describe it really quickly for you.
Yeah, that might help. Certainly not everybody has experienced one.
Yeah. So it's a big fiberglass tank, like bigger than your bathtub, way bigger than your bathtub. So if you could stretch out with your arms out above your head and your toesies all pointed out, like that big. And it's got 12 inches of water on the bottom. There's somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of Epsom salt dissolved in the water.
Okay.
So when you get in there, you just float right along the surface. So kind of right along your center
Dead Sea.
line. Yeah, exactly. Precisely. And so the water and the air in there is heated to what we call surface temperature neutral. So it doesn't really feel hot. It doesn't really feel cold.
Equilibrium.
It just doesn't kind of feel like anything at all after a while. And then you got control over the lights and sounds. So if you want, you can have no light, no sound, no gravity, no sensation of the skin, no really sense of smell. Like there's absolutely nothing for you to focus on. So I got into the tank my first time, and so I'm in that environment, just pitch black, no sound. I'm just kind of floating in space, basically. And it felt great. Like, it felt really good. It was really novel. I was starting to get pretty relaxed, although, like, the levels that I've been able to get that to after a practice of hundreds and hundreds of hours in the tank is nowhere near compared to where it is now. But for the first time, I started to kind of relax. My body started to unwind. My shoulders started to come down. My jaw, my neck started to loosen up a little bit.
All this tension releases.
All those places where we carry tension.
Yeah.
And then I had this thought. I was like, I'm getting kind of hungry. You know, like maybe I should go to that restaurant that I saw around the corner after this. And then I watched this unfold in my head. I imagined myself at this bar restaurant thing, and it would be too loud, and there would be people walking around, and immediately, like, I'm the exit's there, and if this guy says this to me, I'm gonna punch him here, and immediately I felt my shoulders start come back up, my jaw clench, you know, like my mind starts to race again with all these possibilities. And then I don't remember exactly what it was, but it just hit me. It was like, okay, these things that pop up into your head, those are not who you are. So you can have like the feeling of like, you can say something like, I'm sad, right? And it's really easy to identify and say like, I am that thought. I'm the thing that's sad, right? But if you said, I'm a refrigerator, you wouldn't think that you're the refrigerator. You would think that I'm the thought that I just had.
Sure.
You know, I'm the thinker of the thought.
Saying.
I'm a refrigerator. You know? So it's very easy to get wrapped up in this place. And I think this is what anxiety really does in stress in general, is it makes you think that you are your thoughts. And for the first time in my life, I had just a little crack in the veil of like, you know, every single thought, especially those ones that were suicidal, self-deprecating, self-hatred, you know, those really juicy ones, I thought I was all those things. And then the first time I get in the tank, I realized that like I'm no more that than I am my left toe, like my left pinky toe.
Sure.
And so it just puts all of this, like, all of these thoughts, all of this mental strain that we live with on a daily basis, kind of back in its place where it belongs, where it's something that I experience, not something that I am. You know, and I don't know that I understood it to that level. I think it's been a long period of growth since then to like really understand what it was. I just knew when I got out of there that I felt better than I ever had in my entire life, and for the first time ever that I could remember, I wasn't stressed out.
Yeah,
and so I spent that entire drive home talking with the person that was with me about how I could do this. Man, I could do this.
Right.
And then I came up with my little plan of going back to work and like saving money.
Yeah, and then it got shelved for a while, but then you take the leap, right? You get out, and I want to be respectful of your time. We probably don't have to have time to go through the whole startup thing, but how do you make it come to life? Like what's the, I mean, you got the drive.
Yeah.
You got the skills.
Yeah, it was a lot of hard work, and And so we raised some money to do it. We took a loan, a small business loan, which was, you know, that was the only way that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be pretty capital intensive to buy a few of these units.
Massively. I mean, they go about $25,000 a piece, at least. And so we got the.
And you got to build out the space for all that stuff.
Build out the space. Yeah. I mean, so you're talking a pretty heavy investment, and so we get down to the end of this, right? And like we're within probably weeks of being able to open the doors, and we realize like, oh my God, we don't have enough money to finish this project, right? And it's like, so where do you get it? You got a couple, like, debt's not really an option. We already knocked that one off the list. So you're talking equity, which, how do you value something that nobody's ever tried before in a brand new market? And then it was like, oh my God, man, crowdfunding, right? Kickstarter, baby.
Yeah.
But that was just as terrifying, because I knew that if we were going to get people invested in this, they were going to have to hear why I believed in it so much.
Yeah. I mean, the
right?
video for your Kickstarter is deep, man.
Yeah, that was unbelievably hard to talk about, even harder to put out there. And one of the, I mean, this is one of the behind the scenes story, but I think that was the first time I ever talked openly about being suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it in a video that tens of thousands of people watched,
Yeah.
you know. And this is the behind the scenes thing is right before, I think the day before we launched that video, I got a phone call, and I hate these phone calls because they're always the same one, of a guy that I served with, and he said that my mentor, the guy that I was closest to when I was in, he had committed suicide that day.
Yeah.
And that obviously brought up a whole bunch of stuff. And like, man, oh my God, if I could have just got this out 3 days sooner, and maybe if he heard it, maybe he would have called, like all that stuff. And so that was just, it was heart wrenching. And I still don't think I've ever like dealt with that. But that's the important thing for people to know about that period, that group of guys that went through. I try to say this every time I end up on a podcast. So I think it's important for people to know. You know, I personally, and this is probably mirrored in the statistics across the board if you really want to look at it, I lost 10 times the amount of friends to suicide than I did in combat.
Wow.
Right? So just think about that. I mean,
it's a sad state of affairs.
Unbelievably sad state of affairs. But what's really cool is, you know, I love this concept of like the obstacle in the way. Mm-hmm. You ever read that book? Or, I mean, it's an old philosophy. But what's so cool about the lab now is, you know, I have built a business that the cornerstone of everything we do is about helping people manage stress. And specifically, the types of people that we do that for are people just like me: anxiety, depression, PTSD, insomnia, chronic pain, right? Those are the people who come in to use it. Not all of them. Like, certainly many people use it for many different reasons, but that's the core of why we do what we do. And we also have been really, really fortunate. This was always kind of part of the idea, was to make this available for veterans for free, or for like some way to give these guys a shot at what I got. And so now we are on our fourth iteration of this, where we have a scholarship program for vets, where, you know, we fundraise from the community. We've had some really outstanding generosity, and it just sets aside some money, and we put these guys through a program where we put them in the tank, put them through this specific protocol, and teach them to meditate. And so that's like, you know, I spend a lot less time, no more 90-hour weeks for me at the lab. So, you know, outside of my little management duties, that's where I get to focus a lot of my effort, and it's unbelievably rewarding.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Sharing the way with all these other people.
Yeah. And what I try to do for people is very much not show them the way. I try to do exactly what my brother did for me that day. Like, man, I don't know. Like, I'm still figuring this stuff out. Right. But it's not when you've got it all figured out, everything's okay. Everything's okay now.
I like that framing. It's not that you know the answer. It's that you're confused as well.
Yeah, I'm working on it too.
It's a solidarity message. We're in this together.
Yeah, we really are. And not just vets. Like,
that's true too. That generalizes to, you know, I see it in myself. I see it in family. I see it in friends. And it's real.
But here's the only difference. Like, I have this conversation all the time at the lab. People come in and they go, you know, I had this unbelievably traumatic experience happen to me. And then they always stop right there and they go, but it's nothing like what you went through.
Right.
And my
I do
answer,
that. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it comes from a good place. I understand it, but it's bullshit. It's a lie. And it's one of the most self-harmful lies that you can tell, because there is no hierarchy of trauma. That's not what it is at all. Trauma has absolutely nothing to do with what happened to you. It's about what happened in you, right?
Yeah, and I can see how that distinction is dangerous for the person.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if I witness, you know, I've seen some things that have stayed with me, and I think, oh, I can't even share these with Matt because he's been in the real shit.
Bullshit.
And you're right. Like, that's my experience of it is what I experience, and your experience is on the sort of psychological level has a lot of similarities.
Absolutely. At least the effect that it had inside of us is probably exactly the same.
Right.
Exactly the same. You know, like I love Eastern philosophy, and one of the what somebody who is smarter than me in that regard would call this is like the second arrow effect.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the first arrow is like, you know, the pain or the suffering that we're in, and the second arrow, which is much worse than the first one, maybe where all of the suffering actually takes place, is when we say like, there's something wrong with me because I feel that way.
Yeah.
And man, if you want to make a huge difference in your life, just focus on picking up when you shoot that second arrow at yourself and just stop doing that. You know, so if you're out there and you're like, man, you know, like I'm struggling with my drinking or something like that, here's the first thing you probably want to do is like, don't worry about like quitting cold turkey today or like whatever. Just stop with that negative inner self narrative. Just let that go, because and this is how stress works. It's like, it tells you what to do. Like, I have to do this if I want to be okay. I have to stop drinking. I have to, you know, fix my marriage. I have to get this business or whatever. And then the physiological response is such that it prevents you from doing the very same thing that you do, because you're so worn out from having this negative inner self narrative. So it's like, I need to go work out. And then you stress about what's wrong with you because you haven't worked out the last 7 days, or you probably won't in the future. And you burn yourself out doing that process. So the chances that you're actually going to walk in the gym are zero. So if you want a place to start there. Just like notice when you have those self-attacking thoughts and see if just for a minute you can let those go.
Yeah, that aligns with something, you know, as somewhat of an endurance athlete of a sort for most of my life, like getting older is hard.
Yeah, man.
You know, I constantly compare myself to my 29-year-old self who trained full time and was really at the tip of the spear. And I never was really that good, but the older I get, the better I was. And you continue to make those comparisons.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I read this phrase recently. It said, every day, take what your body gives and nothing more.
Yeah.
And it's simple. I mean, it's not very insightful. But when you think about it, like, wow, every day I'm trying to take more than what my body's giving me. Every day I think I should be faster. I should be this. I should be that. And that generalizes to work. It generalizes to being a parent, to a business owner, or whatever. Like, every day you got what you got.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the fact that it might not be what you want it to be today.
Yeah. And I would go a step further to say, like, that thought itself is the problem. The problem isn't that you're getting slower or you're whatever. Yeah. The problem is that you can't stop beating yourself up about what you think the problem is.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. Which is like, so it's such a distraction, and it's negative, and
it saps your energy.
Yeah.
It just, like, whatever you might have been able to muster, it just steals that from you.
So, Matt, this has been a pretty powerful conversation for me. It's a different kind of podcast. I mean, we started under the premise of learning about your business.
Yeah.
We sometimes do that on this show, is, you know, talk to entrepreneurs and so forth.
Yeah.
But to me, this has been so much more valuable for me, and hopefully for the audience to hear your story.
Yeah, good.
But as we close, I would like to give you the opportunity to say, hey, if people want to learn more about the lab and the work and the great stuff you're doing to help people find relief for their stress and anxiety, how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you can find us on the internet where you find everything else. We're everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, all those. If you want to check out our website, everything that I've talked about, we've really undergone this process of trying to recenter everything we do around stress. And the other things that I've talked about. So if you want, go to www.enlytenlab.com, and it's spelled a little funky, ENLYTENLAB.com. And as always, you can find us on the hip strip.
Awesome. Matt, thanks so much for sharing all your wisdom, experience, and really appreciate it.
That was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. If you're anything like me, this one will stick with you for a while, as it should. And check out Enlyten Lab. It's a place that helps people, and it certainly can help you or someone important to you. Okay, coming up next week, we have number 7 in the Sea Change series. We're bringing back friend of the pod, Micah Larson. Stay tuned for that one next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps: executive producer Stefan Borsum and interns Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.